Hi guys, welcome back to Queen Bean Reads. Prior to today's video, I put out a poll on the Queen Bean Reads Instagram page to see what you guys wanted to see next. The two options were a brief overview of everything that I've read in 2020 so far, or my top 5 favorite books from 2020 or so far, something like that. What won was the brief overview of everything that I've read so far in 2020. That being said, hopefully this video isn't terribly long.
So, let's just jump right into it.
I just want to stress that it is not about the number of books that you read. As long as you have found joy and comfort in whatever way is best for you. For me, that's books. The first book that I read in 2020 pretty much foreshadowed how 2020 was going to go for me. The first book I read was Lord of the Rings, the first book, Fellowship of the Ring. This is the 3 books I think there are. I only read the first one. The reason why I said it foreshadowed how this year was going to go is because it was incredibly boring for me. Not gonna lie at all. If you love Lord of the Rings, I am so sorry. At the beginning, I was definitely intrigued in the story. However, it just got incredibly boring. They're walking, they're meeting people, they're walking, they're meeting people. And that was pretty much it. So I really struggled to get through this. I read this in January and part of February. This was the only book that I read in January. And I didn't enjoy it. I kind of wish I would have stopped and picked up something else. At least now I can say that I read the first book of Lord of the Rings. I did like The Hobbit. I read The Hobbit in the past. So I was like, oh, let me just start the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And I don't think that I am going to finish it. However, if you disagree and you think that the second and third book get better, definitely leave a comment below or DM me to maybe encourage me to try to finish it if you think it's worth it. So The Lord of the Rings, I gave 2 stars out of 5. I've never given anything 1 star, and I probably should have this book for as much as I hated reading it, but I gave it 2 stars because it was really well written, and obviously it's a classic. People love this story. I would feel terrible giving it 1 star, so I gave it 2 stars. So naturally, after that disaster, the second book that I picked up, I wanted it to be interesting, easy, and something that I knew that I would love. So I read Coraline by Neil Gaiman. I read this really quick. I mean, it is a children's book. I really love the movie Coraline so much. Once I found out it was a book, I knew I had to read the book. It was very similar to the movie, but the movie I feel like was better. And that's the first time I've ever said that about a book to movie transition. When I was reading this, I remember just thinking, man, I wish I was watching the movie right now because Tim Burton does such a good job of painting this for me. I mean, it's a great movie. It is one of my favorite kid movies for sure. So for Coraline, I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I read starting in February and into March was Fates and Traitors by Jennifer Schiaverini, I believe is how you say her name. This was a novel about John Wilkes Booth, the actor who shot Lincoln and killed him. This is a work of historical fiction. It was okay. It was very slow to get into for me. However, I did find myself interested in his family life and his family members more so than his life. And it was kind of interesting looking into his love life with Lucy Hale, which is a rumored love life. So, I mean, it was an interesting perspective, but definitely a little slow to get into. She is definitely a good writer, but I definitely think it was a little sensationalized for sure. I mean, it was okay. Out of all the historical fiction that I've read, definitely not my favorite. But I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. I think that she's a great writer. I didn't know a lot about John Wilkes Booth, and I do feel like I know a little bit more about him. In March, it definitely starts picking up for me. Thank goodness. The fourth book I read was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This again is a historical fiction, more leaning fiction, about a girl who is hired by this famous actress to write her biography. And she has no idea why she was chosen to do this, and nobody really understands because she's kind of new. So Evelyn Hugo was clearly married 7 times and has only been in love once. You will find out when you read this who she was in love with, and it really is just a beautiful story. And I am not very romantic. Maybe I'm getting more romantic as I get older, but I never used to like romance or like romantic movies, romantic books. But this book is so good, beautifully written. I stayed up late reading it. I read it in 2 days, and this was the kick in the butt that I needed to read more, because this was a beautiful story. I don't want to give too much away, but I think that some people will really love this book. Specifically, my friend Jess, I really want her to read this. I feel like this book was written just for her. So I give this book 5 out of 5 stars. And the 5th book I read was Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. This was also a really beautifully written, vivid book. Probably some of the most beautiful writing that I've ever read or heard, I guess, since I listened to this on an audiobook. Just the imagery, the scenery, I felt like I was there, especially since I listened to this audiobook taking walks around my neighborhood or in the woods. I highly recommend that, by the way. This was a really good audiobook. The woman who read it was just so animated, and she had different voices for every character. I really loved this book. I felt very, very connected to the main character and a few other characters in the book. I give it 5 out of 5 stars, and I recommend this one to anyone. It might take you a while to read, but I think that it's worth it. I was engaged the whole way through, and there's definitely a little bit of mystery whodunit in there as well. Since I read so much fiction and also read several books in a row that I really loved, that kind of helps me get back into the reading groove. So I decided to pick up something a little bit more difficult. The 6th book I read was Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. This was really good though. This was good. This was engaging the whole way through. I loved this book, and anytime I learned something new, I would look at my boyfriend and tell him about it, and I was just rambling off facts the whole time I was reading this book. This is a lot of review material from college. However, there were some interesting facts that I didn't know, and I also just had fun reading this. This wasn't a hard read. Don't be intimidated by it. I even bunny-eared pages that were my favorites that I would like to refer back to. I would recommend this to the person who wants to read something and gain a lot from it. And another reason why I really liked it is because I feel like it put a lot of what I believe and what I thought but didn't know how to articulate myself into words. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. This was a good book. I love a good nonfiction. So again, I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. And the 7th book that I read was Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Suzanne. Mine is a very old, broken copy. I really love old books. This is the original printing from 1966. So I was very happy to get this thrifted. It was a book I've always wanted to read because I've seen the movie, and I just like being transported back to a certain time period. That being said, there's definitely some inappropriate stuff in here that wouldn't fly today, but if you just take it for what it is, realize that it's inappropriate and that it was a different time, it's definitely readable, and it's not terribly off-key. This was kind of a guilty pleasure read for me. I really just enjoyed the drama of it. I felt very invested in the characters and their lives the whole way through. However, I only gave this 4 out of 5 stars. The ending kind of bummed me out and it got hard to read towards the end. The beginning I was flying through, but the ending I was like, I wasn't too happy with it. But I think that if you enjoyed the movie, you should definitely read the book. There is a lot more in the book. It's beautifully written and you get a lot more invested than you do in the movie. However, you will miss out on those giant beehive style hairdos. The 8th book I read was Little Women. I listened to this on audiobook. Growing up, I really liked the 90s version of Little Women, the movie with Winona Ryder, and I can't remember who else is in it. And I hadn't seen it in a long time, and I knew that the new movie had just come out. I wanted to read it before I watched the new movie so that I could compare the two. It was good. I mean, I listened to it and I'm glad that I listened to it because I feel like if I would have read it, I would have been really bored and it would have took me a long time. But I like to listen to audiobooks when I take walks. So this was the one that I listened to after Where the Crawdads Sing. I just take it for what it is. I'd give it 4 out of 5 stars. Not bad, not my favorite. The 9th book I read was Lovely War by Julie Berry. This is a historical fiction that took place during World War I. It was interesting. It was definitely more romantic than I had hoped. This was a young adult novel, and it was a good look into what it was like for the Black American soldier during World War I and the crap that they had to put up with. I was definitely more interested in that than the main character's romance. Oh yeah, and there was this weird kind of trial going on with the Greek gods during all of this, and they were the ones who are narrating this story. That's an interesting way to write this, to do this, so I definitely give them credit for that, but I just didn't really get how it connected. Don't get me wrong, it was a beautiful story, but it just wasn't what I was looking for out of this book. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. However, I think that for teenagers, this would be a pretty good book. The 10th book I read was The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. This was a beautiful book. It was beautifully written. However, it was terribly sad. Just go into it knowing that Piccola's life was painful and devastating, and just her outlook on herself was just heartbreaking to read. I was at the beach when I was towards the end of this book, and there was a scene in this book that made me terribly sad, and I cried in public on the beach. So just be warned that you're probably gonna cry, and that's okay. It was a good story. Toni Morrison is just a great writer. Everybody knows it. So I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. Even though it made me cry, I definitely probably needed to cry. The 11th book I read was The Book of V by Anna Solomon. This book was super relatable. It follows the lives of 3 different women from those eras, and it was very interesting. I definitely think that this could be a good one for a group of people to read together, like a book club, and kind of discuss certain things, because there are definitely topics for discussion in here. I did find it a little bit hard to get into and stay engaged throughout. I was definitely more interested in V's story, who was a senator's wife during the Nixon era. However, I did understand why they were following the 3 women, because they all ended up connecting at the end. That being said, it really didn't start to pick up until towards the end, but I still think it was a good book. I think Anna Solomon is a great writer, and there's definitely a lot to discuss in here. So I do wish that I hadn't read this alone and I read it with a group of women so that we could discuss certain aspects of this book. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Good book, not my favorite. The 12th book that I read was My Sister, the Serial Killer. What a fun ride this was. It's tiny. I finished this in less than 24 hours for sure. I was hooked from the very first page. So if you are someone who has struggled getting into a book, this is a really good book because it's engaging from page 1, where they are dragging a dead body out of a house. There were relatable characters and definitely a relatable sibling rivalry. If you have a sister, you will kind of understand and laugh at their relationship in this book.
It was witty, it was fun, there was murder, there was mayhem.
I just had a lot of fun reading it, and I haven't felt that way in a long time, where I'm just like having so much fun. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I think that if you kind of like thriller themed books, horror themed books, this isn't like gory, it's not really scary, but it definitely has that kind of theme going on. So if you kind of want to dabble or tiptoe into something like that, this one was fun. The 13th book that I read was The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson, and this was about the Great Migration that took place of Black people in the South relocating up north. This was a really good book. It was not boring at all, as you would think a kind of history themed book would be. I mean, I wouldn't think that, but you might think that. This one was not boring. It actually follows people's life stories from when they were kids into kind of what made them move and their actual moving process and what it was like for them when they were at their final destination. It was definitely a very good book and definitely a topic that I don't think is covered enough in school, if at all. And I think that it should be required reading. I think that everyone should read this book. I definitely recommend this book to everyone on planet Earth, especially those who live in America, because we have all seen this happen, but we never really talked about what exactly happened. So I think it's a great book for everyone. Highly recommend. 5 out of 5 stars. All right, that's it. There were 6 5 out of 5 stars, so that's an awesome start to 2020. And I know there are going to be a ton more. I am so excited for what I'm reading, even just the rest of this month, but for what I have planned to read in August. So I definitely want to make a favorites video of my favorite books of 2020, although I feel like it would be super hard to narrow it down because I really did love all my 5-star books. Maybe I'll do a top 10 at the end of the year. I didn't want to give away any spoilers in this video because I want you guys to be inspired and maybe pick one of these up and tell me what you think. That's it, because editing me is gonna hate me for how long I have recorded today. But I hope you guys are having a great day, a great July. I hope you guys join me for the reading rush. Watch what I'm reading in the video. I'll link it up here or down here. And that is it. Have a splendid day.